My name is Miriam Hart, and today was supposed to be simple. I turned 67 this morning. No party, no big fuss, just me, my coffee, and the soft hum of the fridge. For the first time in years, I wanted to enjoy a quiet birthday without cleaning up after anyone. But before the coffee even cooled, my daughter-in-law's voice cut through the kitchen. "Old woman, cook something. Are you planning to let the kids starve?" She stood there in her scrubs, eyes dark with exhaustion, a hospital badge still hanging crooked on her chest. My son, Daniel, sat at the counter scrolling through work emails like he hadn't heard a thing. Maybe he hadn't, or maybe he'd learned not to notice. I froze with the coffee pot in my hand. It wasn't the first time Kayla barked an order at me. But on my birthday, the word old landed heavier than usual. It wasn't just an insult, it was a reminder that in my own house, I'd somehow turned invisible. Daniel finally looked up, sighed, and said, "Mom, can you just make something quick?" The same tone he used when asking Alexa to play a song. No happy birthday, no hug, no warmth. I wanted to remind them both who I was, the woman who once packed Daniel's lunch every morning, who taught him to tie his shoes and pray before eating. But the words wouldn't come out. Instead, I poured the coffee, watched the steam rise, and something inside me hardened, quietly, firmly. If they wanted me to cook, I would. But this time, I'd add an ingredient they'd never tasted before. The house was quiet after that, too quiet. The kind of silence that follows after someone says something they shouldn't have but won't take back. Daniel had gone upstairs with his laptop, pretending to work, and Kayla slammed a cupboard or two before disappearing into the guest room. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at the streaks of sunlight crawling across the counter. The smell of burnt toast lingered from breakfast, sharp and stale, like the morning itself. On the table sat a small card from my neighbor, Mrs. Ortiz. She'd left it the night before, probably thinking she was being sneaky. Inside was a tiny bouquet of grocery store daisies with a note that read, "For the woman who still makes Maple Glen smell like cinnamon." I smiled, then felt that sting rise again in my throat. Someone remembered. Someone outside my family. I opened the back door, stepping onto the porch. The air was crisp and cool, the kind that makes you want to breathe a little deeper, as if the air itself could rinse you clean. Across the street, Mrs. Ortiz was watering her plants in her floral robe, humming off-key. When she noticed me, she waved her watering can. "Happy birthday, darling," she called. I waved back, holding up the daisies like proof that her kindness had landed exactly where it was needed. Behind me, through the open window, I could hear Kayla's voice again, lower now, irritated. "I can't deal with her attitude today. Danny, I just can't." Her words fell like dust on glass, soft, but impossible to ignore. Something inside me clicked into place. I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. Just awake. I turned back to the kitchen and looked around. The old ceramic bowls lined up on the shelf, the heavy cutting board Daniel made for me when he was 12, the set of blue china plates that had only come out for Thanksgivings and birthdays. My hands brushed the edges of the table, remembering every meal cooked here, every holiday survived. If this kitchen had been my stage for half a century, maybe it was time for a different kind of performance. I wiped the counter, took my purse, and checked for my wallet. The decision felt strange and solid, like the first step after too long sitting still. When I stepped outside, the world smelled of cut grass and bakery air. A young couple jogged past, pushing a stroller, nodding politely. I thought about how life moves in circles, one generation running ahead while the other lingers, watching from the porch. At the grocery store, I walked past the aisle slowly, my cart creaking with each turn. I didn't need a list. My hands moved on their own, reaching for chicken thighs, russet potatoes, smoked paprika, brown sugar, cinnamon sticks, and the little jar of baking powder that always made the kitchen smell like autumn. No one would know that the choices were deliberate, that each ingredient was a memory, wrapped in a lesson waiting to be served. When I reached the checkout, the cashier smiled and asked, "Big dinner tonight?" I smiled back. Something like that. By the time I loaded the groceries into the car, the plan was already finished in my mind. It wasn't revenge, not really. It was a recipe, a gentle one, maybe, but one that would remind everyone in that house who had kept it together all these years. When I came back home, the house was still. Kayla's car was gone, probably a grocery run of her own, or maybe she just needed air. Daniel was upstairs in his office, his voice muffled through the floorboards as he talked on the phone. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It was hollow, like a house waiting for something to happen. I set the grocery bags on the counter and took off my cardigan. The air felt thick with dust and resentment. Maybe it was just me. I started washing the chicken, letting the cold water run over my hands. My joints complained, but I didn't mind. Pain has its rhythm. It keeps you focused. I marinated the meat in a mix of brown sugar, smoked paprika, and a pinch too much cayenne. The red dust covered my fingers like proof. As I stirred the marinade, I thought about all the years I'd spent cooking for this family. The mornings when Daniel was a boy, standing on a chair beside me, sneaking bits of dough from the mixing bowl. The nights I stayed up making soup when he had the flu. The holidays when Kayla smiled at me politely, but never quite warmly. The thought made me sigh, long and slow, like the oven preheating. By 10:15, the kitchen had started to come alive, the faint hiss of oil in the skillet, the rhythmic knock of a knife against the cutting board. I peeled potatoes, diced them, sprinkled them with salt and a touch of sugar. A strange combination, maybe. But life had taught me that sweet and bitter often lived in the same spoonful. I hummed under my breath, an old gospel tune I hadn't thought of in years. The sound echoed faintly in the room, bouncing off the tile and cupboards. For a moment, it almost felt holy. Then Daniel came downstairs. "Hey, Mom, you're cooking?" His voice was half a question, half a distraction from guilt. I didn't turn around. "You told me to, didn't you?" He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "Kayla didn't mean it that way. You know, she's just tired." "Tired," I repeated softly, tasting the word. "That makes two of us." He didn't respond, just stood there watching me toss the potatoes into a pan. After a moment, he said, "Need help?" I smiled without looking at him. "No, sweetheart. This one's mine." He lingered a bit longer, then went back upstairs. I listened to the creak of each step until the house was quiet again. Then I exhaled, slow and deep, and went back to work. The kitchen filled with the scent of roasted paprika and caramelizing sugar. It was heavy, almost theatrical. I could imagine the moment they'd take the first bite, the surprise, the confusion, maybe even laughter. It wasn't about payback anymore. It was about being heard. At 11 Nia, I pulled the chicken from the oven and let it rest. The skin had turned a deep, coppery red, glistening under the light. It looked almost too good. I had to stop myself from smiling. Next came the apple pie. I whisked flour, sugar, and baking powder together, humming again. I measured the baking powder with a generous hand, just enough to make the crust rise a little too high. When I poured the batter into the dish, it puffed slightly, like it had its own breath, as it baked. I wiped the counters clean and set the table. From the cabinet, I brought down the blue china, plates that had slept in dust for years. Each dish carried a memory. Daniel's first promotion, Kayla's bridal shower, the last Thanksgiving before my husband passed, I laid them out carefully, like relics of a quieter time. When the oven dinged, I opened the door and was greeted by a rush of cinnamon air. The pie had risen beautifully, but a thin crack ran across the top, like a scar. Perfect. I thought, beautiful, but imperfect, just like this family. I turned off the oven and leaned against the counter, letting the heat wash over me. My reflection shimmered faintly in the oven glass. Older, yes, but not invisible. Through the window, I saw Mrs. Ortiz across the street again, her robe replaced with a cardigan now. She waved. I lifted my hand and waved back. For a moment, I wondered what she'd say if she knew what I was doing. Probably something like, "Well, about time, honey." By 11:45, the dishes were done, the food was plated, and the kitchen smelled like a memory that refused to fade. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat at the table, looking at my work. Each plate was a message written in salt and sugar. Each bite would speak for me louder than any argument could. The clock ticked toward noon, steady and indifferent. Upstairs. Daniel's footsteps moved again. I straightened my back, folded my hands, and waited for the sound of Kayla's car in the driveway. They'd asked me to cook, and I had. Now. It was their turn to taste what words could never say. The clock struck 12 just as Kayla's car pulled into the driveway. I heard the engine cut off, then the familiar slam of the door. Daniel's steps followed down the stairs a moment later. The timing was perfect, almost as if the universe had decided to join my little plan. I set the table, smoothing the napkins beside each plate. The chicken glowed under the kitchen light. The potatoes glistened, and the pie waited near the window, its scent weaving through every corner of the room. Kayla walked in first, phone in hand, scrolling like she hadn't left the hospital 20 minutes ago. Daniel followed, quieter than usual, his face neutral but wary. "Smells good," he said, testing the air. "It should," I replied. "It's your favorite. Barbecue chicken, mashed potatoes, and apple pie." He smiled, half relieved, half confused, as if waiting for the catch. Kayla set her phone down and sank into a chair. Her scrubs looked rumpled, her hair pulled back too tight. I could see the fatigue in her eyes, the kind that comes from running on empty for too long. "Everything looks nice, Miriam," she said. The tone was polite, distant, a peace offering in disguise. "Thank you, dear." I kept my voice light, the way you do when you're testing the temperature of water before you step in. We started with the soup, smooth and creamy, made from the potatoes that had absorbed a bit more sugar than usual. Kayla took a spoonful first. She frowned, tilting her head. "Is this sweet?" "A little," I said. I tried something different. Daniel followed. "It's fine," he said quickly, swallowing hard, though I noticed the tiny twitch in his jaw. I waited until they moved on to the chicken. The smell of smoked paprika filled the air, rich and deep. They each took a bite. Daniel coughed first, grabbing his water glass. "Wow, that's spicy." Kayla blinked, her face flushing. "Oh my God, that's hot." "Too much?" I asked, feigning innocence. I must have misread the label. The paprika looked mild. Daniel chuckled through a cough. "It's okay, Mom. It's just a lot." Then came the pie, the final act. It looked golden and proud. The crust cracked like lightning across a sky of cinnamon. I sliced it carefully, letting the pieces steam in the cool air. The crust had risen too high, giving it a strange, uneven beauty. Leo toddled in, fresh from his nap, rubbing his eyes. "Pie," he squealed, climbing onto his booster seat. "Yes, sweetie," Kayla said, still fanning her mouth. "Pie." The first bite silenced everyone. The texture was fluffy, almost bread-like, and the sweetness came in waves, pleasant at first, then too much to ignore. Leo didn't mind. He giggled, crumbs sticking to his cheeks. That laugh, pure and bright, broke something open in the room. The tension slipped, like steam escaping a lid. Daniel met my eyes, realizing, maybe for the first time all day, what I'd done. "Mom," he said softly, "you did all this on purpose, didn't you?" I smiled. "Do what, darling?" He exhaled, almost laughing. "The sugar, the spice, the baking powder, all of it." Kayla looked at him, then at me. "You're kidding." "No," I said gently. "I'm not." I set down my fork, the sound delicate against the plate. "You wanted me to cook, so I cooked. But I thought I'd give you a taste of what it feels like to be in this kitchen every day. Sweet when it should be simple, sharp when it should be soft, a little too much of everything." For a long moment, no one spoke. The clock ticked on the wall, loud and steady. Daniel's face softened first. "Mom," his voice broke a little. "I'm sorry." Kayla shifted uncomfortably. She looked younger then, less like the sharp-tongued nurse who'd barked at me, and more like a girl who'd realized she'd gone too far. "I was exhausted," she said quietly, "and I took it out on you. That wasn't fair." "It happens," I said. "We all forget ourselves sometimes. But today of all days, my birthday, I wanted to remember who I am, and I needed you to remember it too." Kayla's eyes glistened. She reached for a napkin but dabbed her eyes instead of her lips. "You made your point," she said, her voice cracking just enough to sound real. Daniel leaned back, exhaling a laugh that wasn't quite laughter. "You know, you could have just said something." I tilted my head. "Would you have listened?" He smiled, shaking his head. "Probably not." Leo, oblivious to the lesson floating around him, picked up a chunk of pie crust and held it up. "This one looks like a heart," he said proudly. We all looked. It did, jagged, uneven, but still unmistakably heart-shaped. And for some reason, that simple thing undid the last bit of tension left in the room. Kayla laughed through her tears. Daniel joined in, and soon I did too. The laughter didn't erase what had been said, but it filled the empty spaces between us, smoothing out the edges just enough. I stood up and began clearing the table. Daniel stopped me halfway. "Sit down, Mom. We'll do it." For once, I let him. I sat, hands folded, watching them move around the kitchen like I used to. The sight of my son rinsing plates and Kayla wiping the counter felt strange and right at the same time. "Pizza?" Daniel asked suddenly. "I think we've earned it." Kayla nodded, sniffing. "Extra cheese." I smiled. "Order enough for Mrs. Ortiz, too. She's been keeping score from across the street." He laughed, picking up his phone. "You got it." As they worked, I caught my reflection in the oven door again. My eyes looked tired. Yes, but alive. Sometimes, a family doesn't need fireworks to change, just a quiet table, a messy pie, and a little courage to say, enough, and maybe, just maybe, a bit of spice. The kitchen still smelled of cayenne and laughter. It was strange, spice and warmth, regret and relief all tangled together. I leaned back and listened to the sounds I'd missed for years, the clinking of dishes, running water, Daniel humming quietly while Kayla wiped the counter. "Pizza's on the way," Daniel said, glancing back at me. "Extra cheese, and one for Mrs. Ortiz." I smiled. Good. She's probably been eavesdropping from her porch all day. Kayla chuckled softly. "She'll know how it ends before anyone else." "Well," I said, "at least it's a happy ending." That made Daniel laugh, an easy, real laugh. I hadn't heard it in so long it startled me a little. Kayla dried her hands and turned toward me, her eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. "Miriam," she began, "I'm sorry. For this morning. For every morning I've made you feel small. I forget sometimes that you're not just helping us, you're part of us." Her voice wavered. The exhaustion in her face looked familiar. I'd worn it once myself. "It's easy to forget," I said quietly. "When you take care of people all day, you forget you're one of them too." She nodded, blinking hard. "You deserve better from me." Before I could answer, Leo came padding in, dragging his toy truck. "Grandma," he said, serious as ever, "no spicy chicken tomorrow, right?" Daniel nearly spit out his drink. I laughed. "No, sweetheart," I said, brushing his hair. "Tomorrow your mom's cooking." He gasped. "Mommy cooks?" That sent us all laughing again, the kind of laughter that feels like breathing after holding it too long. The doorbell rang. Daniel opened it to reveal Mrs. Ortiz, radiant in her floral cardigan, holding a box of cookies. "I smelled forgiveness," she said. "Figured I'd come before it got cold." "Come in," I told her. "We've got pizza coming." When the food arrived, the table filled with slices, lemonade, and the kind of chatter that only happens after a storm. Daniel handed me a small envelope. Inside was a card, simple, blue. "Happy birthday." Mom in gold letters. Their names were written inside, crooked but real. A bakery gift card slipped out. I smiled. "You remembered." Kayla squeezed my hand. "We didn't deserve the reminder you gave us, but we won't forget it." "Next Sunday," she added. "Oh, I'll cook. You can sit." "Are you sure about that?" I teased. She grinned. "I'll even let you critique it." Daniel laughed. "Careful. She's tougher than Gordon Ramsay." I looked at both of them, their faces finally light again. "That's all I ever wanted," I said. "For us to sit here and remember we're family." After dinner, Mrs. Ortiz left with her leftover slices and a wink. The sun dipped lower, washing the kitchen in gold. Daniel stacked boxes, Kayla rinsed plates, and Leo had fallen asleep on the couch, his toy truck in his hand. I stayed in my chair, soaking it all in. The smell of cinnamon, the hum of the dishwasher, the soft sound of my family moving in rhythm again. Daniel caught my eye. "You okay, Mom?" "I'm perfect," I said. "For once. I don't have to fix anything." He smiled. "Then it's a good birthday." "The best," I said. Through the window, I saw Mrs. Ortiz crossing the street, humming, her cardigan fluttering like a flag of peace. I waved. She waved back. The world outside looked calm again. Maple Glen bathed in late sunlight. Inside, everything felt lighter. Maybe birthdays weren't about cake or candles. Maybe they were about remembering that you still matter, to the people you love and to yourself. I stood, turning off the lights one by one, letting the quiet settle. The kitchen gleamed faintly in the dusk, a room reborn from noise and misunderstanding. I whispered to the empty air. "That's enough. Sometimes you don't need to shout to be heard. Sometimes all it takes is a spoonful of sweetness, a dash of heat, and the courage to serve it with love." After everyone had gone to bed, the house slipped into a hush that only old homes know, the kind where every creak feels like a heartbeat. I stood by the sink, my fingers trailing over the counter's cool surface. The smell of cinnamon still lingered in the air, mingling with a faint trace of smoked paprika, like the day itself refusing to leave completely. The moonlight spilled through the window, glinting off the blue china stacked neatly on the shelf. Those dishes had seen decades of meals, birthdays, arguments, apologies, laughter that carried late into the night, Every mark, every tiny chip told a story. Tonight, they felt whole again. I poured myself one last cup of coffee, not because I needed it, but because it felt like a quiet celebration. I thought about my husband, how he used to joke that a family was just a recipe you had to keep adjusting. Maybe he was right. As I took that final sip, the house exhaled around me. I felt lighter, not because anyone had changed overnight, but because I had respect. I realized isn't demanded. It's taught, gently, patiently, one meal at a time. And in this kitchen, that lesson had finally been served.